I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of Triangle Free Thought Society for coming to this talk. We have with us today Mark Dann from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and he is the Director of Government Affairs, and he's going to be helping us support our pillar of activism by giving us a view of what we can do to be more active in these times, even in these stay-at-home and social distant times. So I'm going to spotlight him and let him further introduce himself as necessary. And this will be more of a moderated conversation than a standard presentation. So with that, take it away, Mark.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much for having me here today. As Matthew mentioned, I'm Mark Dann. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So that means I'm Freedom from Religion Foundation's voice on Capitol Hill. My job is to raise the profile of the organization, and also it's to promote the separation of state and church on the Hill as well, whether it's supporting legislative initiatives, working with other organizations, or working with the White House as well to advance our legislative agenda. But before we begin, it would just be helpful if everyone could just briefly go around, since we're a small group, go around, introduce yourself, and just say one thing of what brought you here today. So why don't we, and we'll just go with, let me just put everyone on gallery view. So
and if we can just go with just first names only in case people don't want to be identified more than that.
So, sounds good. So Leah.
Hi, I'm Leah. And what brought me here today was my dad thought this talk would be interesting for me. So yeah.
Anything about that would be interesting for you, or?
I'm an activist, so activism is one of my hobbies, passions. So I think I'm very excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. Any particular thing you're working on?
My big thing is gun violence. I'm in Students Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'm trying to pass a lot of anti-gun violence legislation, both locally and nationally. So.
Sounds great. All right. Michael and Lynn.
Oh, you go first.
I have not been involved in activism. I'm a follower, not a leader in this case, and very, very interested.
Sounds good. Lynn?
I'm Lynn, and I don't have any particular reason for being here. Just no particular reason.
Sounds good. Glad you're here. Linda?
Okay. Well, I just figured that you know a lot more about these things than I do, so that's good enough for me. Find out what's going on with the FFRF.
All right. Lynn?
Yeah, I'm interested in activism, not as active as I'd like to be, especially not now, but I definitely do a little more following on that than leading, but I do have a sharp keyboard on social media when I can. So. Great.
All right, Eric?
Hey, well, I'm on the board, so I have to be here. No, we are trying to get back in touch with our original founding activist roots for TFS. And boy, we really dodged a bullet the last 4 years. And I think activism is more important now that we have sanity back in power. But you know, we've seen how easily it can slip away.
Okay. And Matthew, should folks who don't have their cameras on, how would you like to move forward? Do you want ask people what they're thinking, or just kind of relax on that?
I mean, if anybody wants to unmute and chime in, we can deal with a little bit of talk over for a second.
All right, Russell?
Yeah, I don't really have any agenda necessarily, other than learning more about what's available to do out there.
Okay.
You know, obviously, religion in our government is governing way more than it should. So I'm interested in what we can do to preserve the separation of church and state.
All right, sounds good. All right, sounds good. And anyone else?
I am openly secular. I have participated in lobby day at the North Carolina State Legislature in years past, and always interested in knowing what's going on with FFRF and how we can
Apparently, the dark state muted his system.
All right, sounds great. Okay, so a little bit, so in other words, we'll touch on a little bit of ways to get involved, what's happening in DC, and we'll go from there. So when Matthew and I were originally talking about this, we imagined it would be, I would say, a few remarks for about a couple minutes, then and then Matthew has some questions, and then we'll just open up to the floor. Does that sound pretty good to everybody? All right, great. And again, I'm here with the fearsome Chihuahua. This is Manny. So if he starts barking or gets out of line, well, that's what's causing a lot of the turbulence around here. So you'll just have to bear with us for a few minutes. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about since many of you mentioned where the separation of state and church is. So just for a quick show of hands, scale of 1 to show of hands, how familiar are folks with the Equality Act? Okay, so the Equality Act is a bill that has recently passed out of the House, and it allows for equal protection of LGBTQ Americans and expands rights for other folks in public accommodations and in other areas. So it's a pretty critical piece of civil justice legislation as well. We have a particular interest in this because one of the main reasons why people would be against the Equality Act is, well, not for a very good reason. It's largely religion. Some people's religion says that this is not good, and therefore I think it's bad. That's really what a lot of the arguments come down to. There is nothing really based in reality of why anyone would oppose the Equality Act. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the debate surrounding the Equality Act and compare it to last year and this year to get a good sense of where things are going for this legislative season. So last year when the Equality Act came up for a vote, you can tell of where do things stand legislatively and what's the mood in Congress. So has anyone ever seen sort of legislators when they've gotten up, make floor speeches and watched any of that? Some. Okay, some heads are nodding. All right. So
Leah and I have gone down and watched it locally here.
Great. And you can tell sometimes when politicians are really interested in something, or sometimes when, if you've ever been to a religious service where people are just kind of going through the motions and going through what they think is the correct answer. Well, the equality debate last year was much more passive. On the opposition side, people would get up, they would say a few things, they would sit back down, and that was about it. Then you had some of the firebrands like Louis Gohmert and Virginia Fox from North Carolina who were pretty into it. But most of the opposition was coming from people who it wasn't there. The spark wasn't there. The people who were supporting the bill were extremely active, were extremely boisterous. They had a lot to say, that this was something they wanted to do. This was for their constituents. All right, let's talk a little bit about what happened this year. This year, the opposition was very fierce. So you had people adding to people like Louis Gohmert. You had people adding to Virginia Fox. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was extremely forceful in a lot of her remarks. And the key part of it was you had Jim Jordan, who was really leading the charge, who was, and again, some of us might know Representative Jordan from Ohio, that this is a guy who was very much a lieutenant of Donald Trump, was supporting the insurrection at the Capitol, that you had this type of fervor. And there were two things people were getting really, really excited about. One, the idea that that transgender Americans are going to transition just so they can win in high school athletics, which is one of the nuttiest things I've ever heard. However, that's extraordinarily crazy. The second part, which similar towards us, is there is a provision in the Equality Act that says the Religious Freedom Restoration Act can't be used for discrimination. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the FRF opposed it because we saw it as a nefarious way that you could open up laws for religious exemptions. I have a religious belief and I don't want to do this and I want to discriminate against people. FFRF saw that early on and opposed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And so this provision in the Equality Act says you can't use religious exemptions to discriminate against people. That's something everyone on the call can support. And the opposition around that was extremely venomous. And that's kind of a little scary because we're starting to see a very big division between the people who support separation of church and state and those who don't. Again, I believe our issue is nonpartisan. It is something the vast majority of secular people, and if you add up secular Americans and religious Americans who support separation of state and church, we're clearly in the majority. However, but the vocal minority seems to be calling the shots in one of America's major political parties. And that's really sad and unfortunate. So what this means for us going forward is that a lot of our legislative initiatives are going to be a little bit harder to pass. Even with the Democratic majorities that are a little thinner, each vote is going to be a little bit more stressful. It's going to be a little hard to get. And also, when things become venomous and things become hard, that's when politicians start getting nervous. So a lot of the work that we want to be able to do on the grassroots level is to be able to engage our elected officials and be able to bolster them so they can speak about our issues, so they can advocate, so we can build up good partnerships with them, and so we can work with them to take votes, or if you're in a tougher area, to lower the temperature on a lot of their saying. And the key part of this is getting to know you as a person, getting to know what issues you support and how that can move forward. So those are kind of my opening thoughts for what's happening in Congress. And Matthew, let's turn it over to you.
The first thing I'm gonna do is give everybody a Zoom tip of the day. While you're keeping your phone, your call on mute, when you do want to talk, if you just hold the space bar down, it temporarily unmutes as long as you're holding it, so you can just talk. And then when you release the space bar, it goes back on mute, so you don't have to go fumbling, looking for settings and buttons or moving your mouse around. Your space bar is your temporary unmute. So Mark, I'm going to ask you a question that I believe was asked of you, and I met you in Madison, but and your answer is what moved me the most to want to bring you in. So you said this is a nonpartisan issue, but I have to imagine that when you're there in Washington, there are some offices where you are more welcome than other offices. And the offices where you're welcome, there's probably less work you need to do because the reason they're welcome is because they agree with you to some level. And obviously you can move them more, but what about those offices where you're not generally welcome? Like why are you there talking to them if they don't want to talk to you?
So there's a yes, no, and sort of for that. Members of Congress and elected official can always do more. There's always more they can do. Even if they said, I've done everything, there's still more that they can do. The most valuable the most valuable commodity in a legislator's day is time. How they spend time and where they spend time, and how their staff spends time and where their staff utilizes time. So, for example, let's say you are with a legislator who is very good on our issues. Well, fantastic. Have they tweeted about it? Have they written press statements about it? Have they come to speak to your group about it? Have they been at candidates forums about your issues? There's always more that you can do. Naturally, as we move further down the line, there's more folks who we hope we can convince who might be a little new. So Deborah Ross is new to Congress. She might not be as familiar as we would like with separation of church and state issues. Okay, great. There's something more to do. We can get her comfortable. We can get her to be a champion on some of our issues. So we hope that she will start leading on that. Co-sponsoring legislation becomes a little bit easier. Always more to do. And then the folks that we know are going to be hard. So let's take Virginia Fox, for example. Okay, she's going to be tough. Let's be perfectly honest about that. But instead of her, if we use the example of the Equality Act, let's say she doesn't give a firebrand speech and she just goes in, votes no, and goes about her way. That would be a huge victory. Well done. And for the legislative session, that would be great. She's seeing the importance of the issue. She's seeing the importance of what you're doing. She might not agree with you, but she's toning down her rhetoric. And especially these days, that's a really critical factor in what we're seeing. So if someone who is staunchly opposed to us can just be toned down a little bit, that's a huge victory, and you should be very proud of yourselves for that.
Anyone have any question they want to jump in with before I harass him more? I'll harass. Okay, Mark, you have a specific example you could share with us of something you consider a win since you started with FFRF?
Yeah, I think our biggest win has been constantly growing the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. So raise your hand if you're familiar with the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. Okay, great. So we've been able to grow that from about, in not a huge span of time, to about 14 members. And this is really critical because if you take a look at the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, it had 10 originally. So it was led by Representatives Huffman out of California and Raskin in Maryland. And there were folks who've been in Congress for years, like Eleanor Holmes Norton and Hank Johnson, and a lot of very solid members. What we started to see, and thanks to a lot of people talking to their member about and engaging them, is that we had last Congress, we pulled on 3 freshman members. So we had Susan Wild, Rashida Tlaib, and Sean Casten. Susan Wild and Sean Casten are from swing districts. So it does show you that our movement is getting broader and in areas. So it doesn't have to be just in the urban core that some of us live in. It can be broader on that. Also, Rashida Tlaib, you have folks that from a different set of backgrounds, who is our first Muslim member of the caucus. She's been able to participate and be able to bring her perspective in as well. So that's something I'm personally proud of. This week, we saw the reintroduction of the Do No Harm Act that we mentioned a little earlier. And last year, we can point to FFRF and a lot of help with your efforts with the writing, calling. We were able to, just FRF, I can clearly say that we had claimed to about 42 co-sponsors. And that's a pretty significant number coming from the secular community. And that's something legislators pay attention to.
Thank you. I'll wait a couple of seconds. If anyone wants to just jump in and ask a question, they can.
I had a question about when you do call into a representative or a senator's office about keeping them on the line. I called Tillis's office about the Equality Act, and I could not have been rushed off the phone faster.
Yep.
By their staff. What are some questions we can lead with that may keep them on the line longer and occupy more of their time so they're aware this is an important issue?
Okay, here's what's happening in the back end of that. What you're saying doesn't really matter. What's happening on the back end is that there's someone sitting at their desk with a piece of paper, and they're just taking notice of who is calling in, favorable against non-favorable. All they need to do is figure out, are you for it or against it? And then they want to move on to their day. So think about what's happening in a Senate office. You have, in an average House office, you have 12 to 14 people split between the home office and Washington, D.C. on the House side, who are responsible for constituent requests and knowing what's happening in the entire federal government. It's a little bit better on the Senate side, where you have based on population, but I think Tillis, don't quote me directly, has about 35 people working for him. So remember, time is the most important quantity. They want to figure out what the information you're trying to convey is and move on. That's the overall working. So the best thing you can do is, yes, your opinion is important, but yes, I support the Equality Act. No, I don't support it. But if you can spend that time getting 10 more of your friends to call, that's where the value is. they need to hear more from you. So remember, it's not a what I'm saying is the most important thing. It's a volume game. And the more people you have calling, the better this will go.
Mark, would you say for people who have been nervous about calling because I don't know what I would say, that all they really have to say is, hi, I'm a constituent, I'm a voter here in North Carolina, and I want to say on this issue, I feel this way. And that's all they really need to do.
Yeah. Even I feel this way, or I support the Equality Act. Great. Perfect. That's it. That if you do that, you get an A+. Well done. Those are things to be proud of. And it's really easy. You can leave a message. It's still being recorded. If you speak to a live person, great. But the most important thing is, if you're thinking, should I call? The answer is yes, call, keep calling. That's the best. That's one of the best things you can do. And we can talk a little bit more about what visits can look like and engagement over time can look like as well, if you guys want.
I think from the board's point of view, one of the things that we have spoken about is how can we, as a group, get more engaged? Like, could we do an advocacy day? Could we do letter writing campaigns? You know, could we do phone? And with the caveat of, we know that we can't jump from 0 to 80. You know, people aren't going to be ready for that appetite. You know, but what guidance would you give us to get us started?
Okay, so, and I think that's very wise, is that as a group, the way I always look at it is there's two things. One, do something, whatever it is. It's good. Trust me on this one. As long as you follow the law and follow the rules, do something, anything. It's much better than doing nothing. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I've done lots of things that I thought, man, this is going to work. And guess what? It didn't work, but it's okay because it was better than nothing. So no matter what it is, try. It'll be just fine. And lead with good intention. So kind of focus in on this discussion, if you could close your eyes and going into the 2022 elections, what would you like to see happen? And we might need to pare this down or work with this, but what would you like to see happen? You can put this in the chat. You can unmute yourself. What would you like to see going into the 2022 election? So say November 1st, what would you like to see happen politically?
Widespread Republican losses.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. And I do need to put on my nonpartisan C3 hat on that. But let's say you want to have, as a C3 organization, it would be.
Well, I would extend that to just want people who are willing to make secular decisions, even if they're not secular themselves. I mean, there's one Democratic candidate who's thrown her hat in the ring for the Senate, who has in the past supported, Republicans running against Democrats, because they're people of faith. I mean, she puts her faith above her party or her country. And the fact that she's a Democrat doesn't make that better than if she was a Republican. So it doesn't really, to me, make a difference in that regard, what the party is. I want to see more secular decisions, and knowing that you have people who are secular, you have people who are just non-Christian in general as a candidate.
So you'd like to see secular issues and separation of church and states have candidates talk more about them and talk more about them in a coherent way, correct?
Yes.
I would love to see it discussed at all. I mean, other than how many people believe in evolution being asked during a debate, oh my God, it never gets even discussed, at least
right.
Especially on a North Carolina local level.
Okay, so you want to be able to put your issues into policy papers, statements, bring it up in debates, have candidates talk about your issue, that it's important. So as people are talking about healthcare, we might want to talk about having access to healthcare for all, regardless of people's background or faith, or a provider can't discriminate against someone because of whatever faith they so choose. That could be an example, right? Okay, so other ideas?
I've got one. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, first, my name's Heather. I just moved here from Cincinnati, so I'm going to apologize on behalf of the state of Ohio for Jim Jordan. Just let me get that out there. His district looks like a seahorse, so it's not our fault, and we are very sorry about him. So anyway, but what I would like to see is the Johnson Amendment have some more teeth to it. And maybe possibly visiting the idea of not having everyone under the sun have tax exempt status.
Mm-hmm. It's a good idea. Yeah, I think so. Okay. Other things that you'd like to see?
I'm hoping to get Rachel Laser from Americans United to come and talk to us about this, but things like vouchers going to religious schools that then turn
Great.
around and discriminate against people that don't belong to their religion.
Okay, so broadening the subjects of getting people to talk about them, issues that are important to you. Great. All right, and Rachel's fantastic. She'll do an excellent job with that. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's start thinking about. All right. Okay. So if we want to engage candidates, what's an easy thing to do?
Speak to candidates.
Go to their office.
Yeah, speak with the candidates. Okay, so now again, I'm not an attorney, but so you do need to engage all the major candidates who are running and be able to provide a paper trail. But again, anything I do say, asterisk, check with a fully qualified attorney. So I'm an attorney, but I'm not an attorney, but I play one on TV. So please check this out a little bit. My understanding is that you do need to speak with all the candidates. So what you do with one candidate, you have to do with all of them. If they don't return your phone call or return your email, that's on them, but you made a good faith effort to engage them. So let's say, speaking with them, that's an easy thing. For most Senate candidates, for most US Senate candidates, they're probably going to have a policy person who you can ask, who you can ask to have a meeting with and speak to. The good news is, especially before a primary, they all are paying attention to you. Something tells me the North Carolina Senate primary is going to be very close. So they're going to be looking very closely to matters. So your sweet spot of time is between now and the primary date. When is the primary?
Oh, it's so far ahead, I haven't even thought about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say for 2020, let's say it's somewhere about May 2022, right? Give or take a little bit.
That's about right.
That sounds about right. Okay, so May 2022. All right, and so you can request an appointment with their policy person. How do you get that phone number? How do you get that information?
On their website.
You can at their website. Who else would know? Who else might know that?
The DCC, the DCCC or RCCC?
Okay, that's good. Leah?
Is there a congressional website that has those numbers?
So okay. So if you call, as long as they're an elected official, you have to ask for their campaign phone number so you can get it that way. But also think about your local elected officials who you might know. They're probably going to be a little bit more open. They're going to be open to it. Chances are they might know the person directly, or if not, they know someone who knows someone to get the phone number, and you might have to do that. So utilize your local elected officials to get that piece of information. Other things that really is good, Facebook Messenger. They're checking. So a lot of times, especially for state legislators, local elected officials, they're all checking, someone is checking Facebook Messenger. So that's always a good way to get in contact with them. And then most campaigns, especially as they're starting out, are going to be paying attention to that. So Facebook Messenger is a good way. Local elected officials are good. If you do know someone who's donated a little bit or who's a pretty good donor, they might also be able to do that. So let's say you have the email address and the phone number of the policy person to talk to. What should you bring with you?
Concise description of what you want.
That's a good one. Yes, concise description. So you can feel free to steal and utilize anything from FFRF as well. I might not be able to make something original for you, but I might be able to point you in the right direction. So that's something I can do to help you out. What else should you bring?
Indication of the number of voters you bring with you.
Very good. So so let's make a list of data. And if someone is thinking or can write this in the chat or wherever, things to bring. So just concise description of what you're talking about, data. how many secular voters are there in North Carolina? Or how many secular Americans are there in North Carolina, percentage-wise? Where's a good place to find that out? A good place to find that out would be, oh, here comes the cavalry. So there we go.
Is that
Okay.
census data?
Census data, but also the Pew Religious Landscape Survey has great information, and they're kind of the gold standard for information about, on the state level, of the secular community, how many people identify as non-religious, and what that means. If you tell most people that probably about 22% of the adult population of North Carolina is non-religious, they're going to be a little surprised. And that's really important to talk about, whether they would identify as an atheist or agnostic, but that's good. So, Lynn, thank you very much for putting that in the chat. Appreciate it. What else should you bring?
If you want to come and talk to us as a group, literature about our group, or at least, contact information.
You want your ask. Okay, here's information. Here's what we want you to do. So come talk to us. Great. Participate in candidates forum. Great. We would like you to tweet about this. Great. So, and the way I always list is put your heart, and again, different people have different styles. I like to put my toughest ask up first, so that way if they say no, you have fallback positions. I know there's arguments for it, against it. It's just my preference. So do what you think is best. What else should you bring? How the issue may affect you or the people around you. That's the winner. Okay. So really good, Leah. Nice job. So Leah, tell us why that's important.
Why I made her come.
Leah, tell us why that's important.
I think it's important just because it could either affect someone either in a bad way or a good way, and they can really like tie emotion to that person. And I think that's why that's important. It's like mostly the emotion behind the issue.
Yeah. People respond to stories. So in sort of what your average, now keep in mind what's also happening on the back end. Let's say you speak to a campaign staffer or have a Zoom conversation. They're going to be probably somebody just yelled at them for something incredibly stupid. So they're probably going to be stressed, worried, and nervous about something. They're also most campaign staffers, and I was a campaign staffer, we'd like to think we're relatively decent people who are doing this for the right reason, but they're probably worried, tired. And what are you, when you're worried and tired and stressed out and someone just yelled at you, what are the things you're likely to remember? And one of the best things you're likely to remember is going to be a good story of why this issue affects you. So an example, and so that's really pretty critical. How did you get involved in this? Why does that matter? Why should you care? And it's okay if you didn't have a teacher or someone who, when you were in school, who discriminated against you, but you have to have some reason of why you're here, why you do this. And that's really the most important thing. So does anyone have like a good personal experience they could share? And again, remember, short attention span. So if you can get this in under 2 minutes, you'll get a genuine applause from me. So does anyone have a quick story they'd like to share about why they're here?
Yeah, if you could talk about why you switched from chorus to guitar, that might be useful.
So I switched from chorus to guitar because my teacher was super religious, and I was only a freshman at the time in high school, and it just made me feel really uncomfortable. And the day of the first concert, there was a guy from the church there who prayed, and then also the teacher prayed backstage, and I was totally freaking out and super nervous about it. So I was like, I have to switch to guitar, and then ever since then, I've been really happy about that decision.
So in a public school, in something that we all pay taxes towards, the teacher said, we're going to have to follow my religion. And if you don't follow my religion, you're going to be excluded from this activity. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I
He
mean,
didn't say it in those words, but that was the feeling. I mean, he prayed with all the students before the concert, so you were the outsider if you weren't bowing your head and going along.
yeah, I was just kind of looking around the backstage area, and I was like, I don't know what to do.
Well, good
And
for
actually, we
you.
talked about this once at a TFS meeting with a representative either from FFRF or AA and American Atheists, not Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the wife of one of the other board members who's not here, see, Erica didn't have to come, came over, and she went to the same school, 20 years ago, had the same teacher, and said, "Oh, she's still doing that?"
Oh,
so
man.
It's been forever.
Yeah. So that's why this is important. That's a real clear example of why separation of church and state. And Leah, congratulations. You get an applause button. So well done, Leah. Nice job. Nice job. So for that as well. So again, it's those. So a very tired and stressed out campaign staffer, they might not remember all the facts and figures. That's why you've written them down. That's why you write things down. But the thing that they won't be able to Google, will be your personal story. So bring with you your stories, your editorials, and your facts and figures, and just think about it in those orders. And remember, watch your times is your best thing. All right. So congratulations. Let's say we've been able to maintain contact with the legislator or with someone who's running for Senate. What's next? What can we do? What should we be asking them to do?
There is a specific, like the Equality Act, a specific bill that's being discussed. Bring it up, by number, by name, and be specific on how you want someone to vote on it, or if they're a candidate, what you'd want their take on it to be, and find out what their take actually currently is.
Yeah. So come out publicly for a bill. So the Do No Harm Act, great one. Equality Act, great one. One thing. Other ones could be, and I'll send you guys our legislative guide and our legislative sheet, so you can take a look and see what works for you. But let me just make a quick note on that to send you our legislative guide on that. And so there can be some things that could be more popular, but in a Democratic primary, or they're going to be a little bit more favorable towards talking a little bit more about this, talking about separation of church and state. Asking for a tweet or a social media post on an issue is an easy one, and it's a good one. So this is actually really cool. What used to happen is that a lot of times organizations would get together and will send out a sheet about an issue that pertains to us. On this one, it was judicial reform and judicial expansion. So it was a bunch of organizations similar to FFS in the civil rights space. We got sent a letter out through one of our coordinating groups, the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, and we sent the letter to the Hill. The first person, the best response, was Elizabeth Warren's office. Why? She recognized the letter and tweeted it and promoted it. It was a big win for us. But if you also think about what's happening on the back end of that, she didn't have to have staff time draft a letter, really write a very coherent response. She could just say, this is important, I support it, go team. And it had a much bigger impact. So a lot of what happens on social media, they're easy asks, and politicians kind of like doing them. Plus, whenever a politician is bored or they want to look like they're pretending to pay attention, they're all checking their Twitter feed. Trust me, they're all doing that. So they want to see what's happening to them online. So a good place to engage a politician online, social media.
And any thought on whether the carrot or the stick is better? If you have a topic and I can bring 1,000 people for X versus I can bring 1,000 people who hate the opposite of X, which is the better approach to take with this when you're talking to this type of person?
Always be honest. So
assuming they're both honest, it's just a matter of how you couch your choice of words, whether you talk about how you can hurt the candidate versus how you can help the candidate. Which is more motivating?
From the governmental affairs desk, I mean, how same thing you would do. Do you respond well when people threaten you?
If it's a big enough threat?
Yeah, but you're not going to be like, this is a really nice person. Thank you for threatening me. I'm going to engage this. The idea for what we're trying to do is build a relationship over the long time. And how do we do that? So think about, yes, you want to have a win today, but also you want to have a win tomorrow. And I think there is what we're saying is, why is it in someone's best interest to support this? One, morally, it's the right thing to do. There's a need for it. It's popular. You can show leadership. There's a lot of things to do. The or else, I would be always very careful with an or else. And if you do use an or else, know strategically what the next steps are going to be.
I wasn't necessarily, I may not have said it as clearly as I'd like to have said it. You don't have to do an or else to be negative. You can help the person by showing them the problems that such and such will bring to them. You can help the person by showing them that this is a great thing to do. It's a subtle thing.
Right.
Mark, if I can cut in for a second, actually, we have an elected official on the call right now. So
Hey.
I'm going to spotlight my closest friends, Audra Killingsworth, who is on the town council here in Apex,
Great.
my town. And maybe she can talk a little to that.
That's wonderful.
Hi there. So, I have definitely run into people with agendas and coming across to us as very threatening. And I can tell you right now that being threatening does not go over well, or being negative does not go over well. In fact, it makes people dig in their heels. So I would say that if you can bring a positive across, then that's going to be what you need to do. If you bring your story and you contact people in good faith, asking for a conversation and asking to change people's minds, then for me, I am much more likely to listen, much more likely to change my mind about things rather than coming across as hostile and angry or, different things like that. I deal with land issues all the time, and people get very upset about their land and how things are used that way. So, I have had people approach it in many different ways. I'm probably one of the most approachable town council members that we've got. I'm very open on social media. I've got my email out there. I've got my phone number out there for people to call and contact me. And I have had people blast all over social media that they've tried to contact me and that, they've done this to me and that to me. And I'm like, okay, haven't heard from you. That you're just wanting a bully pulpit, basically, at that point. So, in good faith, trying to contact people and have that conversation, trying to change people's minds with a heartfelt story is going to make a bigger difference in my mind.
Audra, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. We appreciate it. And tell me, where are you a council member?
Apex.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about Apex.
So Apex is a kind of emerging area. Mm-hmm. We were previously very red. So we were right outside of Raleigh. And Raleigh was considered a blue area. And then all of the outskirts of Raleigh used to be very red, very conservative. And over the past 4 years or so, things have changed quite a bit. The outside of Raleigh is becoming much more blue. Some areas are purple. We've still got a few holdouts that are red, but it's not much. So our focus has been changing quite a bit in Apex to a more environmentally friendly, affordable housing focus. I'm sorry, my dog is barking in the back.
I joined the club. Yeah, I've got some active ones here too. So all dogs, children, bring them around. They're great.
So our focus has changed from being a very insular area in town that really the previous council members didn't want to interact with state, county, federal officials at all. It was basically just kind of stay in our own little ball here and don't talk to anybody, which led us to having a lot of our local abilities taken away by the General Assembly.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is our General Assembly has previously granted rights to other cities and towns that have asked for things like protection for personal rights, being able to charge impact fees in an area where we are growing exponentially. So all of those things that we missed out on because we didn't bother speaking up. The elected officials at that point in time didn't bother speaking up. So our focus now has been on making those relationships with our county, our state, and our federal officials. And in doing so, we have gotten one of the highest CARES Act reimbursement levels this time around for Wake County. So Raleigh's first, we're second, even above Cary, which is unusual because they're much bigger than us. But it helps because we have a good relationship with Deborah Ross. And so
that's great.
We speak up and, you know, that's something that was unusual before.
Sounds good. And that kind of gets me to the second part is that what's going to happen with redistricting for 2022 for North Carolina?
We're expecting more House seats.
Okay.
For Wake County, we're expecting to have another House seat, but you know, that redistricting right now, Republicans are in control of our House and Senate. Therefore, they have the ultimate control of the redistricting area. We're expecting that they will probably gerrymander at least one completely red district in Wake County.
Okay.
Most likely the southeastern portion of the county, because that's kind of where one of the bigger holdouts is. But we expect that Apex, part of Holly Springs, mostly Cary area will be a completely blue district.
Okay, so the bottom line is that there could be some new people who are running for office in 2022.
Correct.
So in addition to the Senate, depends on where it is, you've got some new people who might be running in some competitive primaries who are going to be paying attention a little bit more than they normally would.
Absolutely. Wiley Nickel has already declared his intent for the unnamed district. For people who did not know that, he is raising money already.
All right, that sounds great. And Leah, you've had experience working with state legislators, correct?
Yeah, I have.
All right. And for folks who have, raise your hand if you've worked with or interacted with your state legislator. Great. All right. So here's the good news. State legislators, they're tons of fun. I mean, most of them most legislators meet part-time. A lot of them are just really neat people. So, you know, there's going to be a few in the bunch that are going to be a little head scratchy, but on the whole, they're state legislators. They shop at Target like the rest of us. And they do their own grocery shopping. They're, you know, very easy to access and they're very good to talk to. Also, if North Carolina is like a lot of states, Leah, about how many people work in a state legislator's office?
I'm not exactly sure.
like
Maybe it does. I mean,
legislature and their LA. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. It's just a legislator in there.
2 to 3 sounds about, that's about right. So one person managing a district of several thousand people with 2 to 3 people. So they're going to be looking to you for engagement about separation of church and state issues, especially on education, voucher. One of the things that is surprising is how much legislators, if you can, and that's what we're talking about, is building a relationship over the long term, so you can be seen as good experts with reliable information that they can utilize and build in. So in other words, part of it is, yes, you want to engage them on the campaign trail, but again, building the relationship over time is pretty helpful. And so in the legislature, and keep in mind, legislative seasons are very packed in. So they're moving at a very, very fast clip during the legislative cycle. So they need to find information that they can utilize quickly and is reliable. Plus, when they're not in session, then they're always looking for new ways to talk. So in legislative session, move fast. When they're out of session, bring them around for coffee. They would love to talk. I would be very surprised if they didn't want to talk to your group.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found when I contacted my state representative is he really wanted to get invited to meetings and called me back after I left a message.
Yep.
Which I was really surprised by, but thrilled to have. He was on the other side of the issue, but was very pleasant to talk to. And, you know, we did have a great conversation.
That's great. That's wonderful. I'm glad you had a good experience.
I would say in Wake County, which I know more of, but also I think Durham County, it's remarkably easy to meet candidates, whether they're running for re-election or first time. If you look around on Facebook for whatever party you're interested in your town or your area, there's picnics usually during election season. They show up at bars and restaurants for Q&As in the evenings, totally open to the public. Like I said, was it 2 ballots ago? I think there were 21 things on my ballot, and I had met 19 out of the 21 people that I was voting for. And Leah has, I think, selfies with all of them.
That's great. Yeah. So most local elected officials are very approachable, and they're also fun. So it's good. And again, some people will say, oh, I don't want to bother anybody, or I don't want to do that. You're not bothering people in the least. You're helping them. You're helping them get better at their job so they can provide more for their constituents. So they do need to hear from you about what you're doing. And just again, as we talked about a little earlier, having good, clear, concise things of what your issue is and what you want them to do will go pretty far.
Mark, I got a question.
Fire away.
When you're talking to your phone up somebody's office, how important is it to track who you've talked to, getting a name of the person for an accountability of saying, on such and such a date, I talked to person X at this, at this, or with Facebook, you've probably got Facebook Messenger. You've got a record of who you're talking to. If they come through as a position, campaign mucky muck or something, actually ask, what's your name?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's I wouldn't look at it from an accountability platform, but from a relationship building portfolio to say. One thing is that you can say, oh, I talked with Molly and we discussed this. And just if you need to bring somebody up for speed, I think it's good. It might not be great if you're saying, well, Molly said we could have X, Y, and Z. And it's one of those things that could get a little tricky on that. But I think it's just think about it from a relationship building perspective on moving that forward. Audra, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I was actually looking at a constituent was talking with me. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. In terms of if you call an office up and you engage a staffer, how important is it to get the name for accountability and relationship building?
If you have a small staff, I would think that building that relationship with that staffer would be important. I think if they have a large amount of staffers, I would think it would not be as important. If you are engaging with a state rep, on Facebook, you're most likely going to be engaging with that person or their campaign manager. That's what I've found. If it's federal level, you have no idea who you're talking to. So, and it doesn't matter as much because you were right. It's mainly a tally issue. Are you for or against something? And that's all they want to know. And you honestly will not know how many people are contacting that person to let them know what's going on. So that they may have 10,000 calls over a several week period of time on a particular issue. So I would expect that it wouldn't matter quite as much to know exactly who you're talking with.
Right. And one of the things that we're doing in FFRF is we're trying to roll out a pilot project of how to build up how to build up relationships over time with your federal elected officials. And it sounds like you guys are pretty interested in that. And we're going to, and again, it's a pilot project, which means not everything is going to be set up. So if you have someone who would like to participate that and has some good, and is not expecting everything to sort of be locked, loaded, and ready to go, and is willing to work with us to build a program, please let me know, because we'd be honored to have you.
I'll follow up with you offline and get information and put it in our newsletter and see if anyone wants to.
Sounds good. All right, that sounds fantastic.
I think it may be time to start doing final thoughts, unless you have burning questions. But I also want to say that between Leah and my wife, they have the personal cell numbers of at least half a dozen elected officials or their assistants, because it's not that hard to be nice to them enough times and help them out and hold meet and greets, and they give you their numbers. During the insurrection, my wife was texting with Deborah Ross personally to see if she's okay, and Deborah took the time to reply back, thumbs up the first time, but like an hour later, actual text back to say, thank you for checking on me. We're okay right now. And really, it's not that hard to be friends, because, kind of like Audra, there are people.
Yeah. So I guess the thing is, all right, one, think about relationship building over the long term between now. Think about that a goal is probably to meet with your local elected official or someone in the local office, Deborah Ross's office, to start building that relationship. I think that's a relatively easy ask. And then start asking of how they can engage, how they can do more, whether it's tweet about the co-sponsor, the Do No Harm Act, or tweet about it. Remember, they can always do more. So, and it is okay to ask for more. That is perfectly fine. You can ask for more. And that's a great way to be. I think that what you're doing is fantastic. I think it's a lot of fun. It's something I've dedicated a fair amount of my life to, and there's a lot of different activities of what you're doing. One thing I do think about is when people say, and we talked about this a little earlier, oh, but what I just do is, it's not going to make a difference. It's just a little bit. Well, a little bit adds up to a lot. And that's really, for the vast majority of us, and when I mean the overwhelming majority of us, is just be a good hand in the bucket brigade. And if you can do that, that is worth a tremendous amount. So just think of, how can I be a good hand in the bucket brigade, and go from there.
Thank you so much, Mark. Again, on the behalf of Triangle Free Thought Society, I want to thank you, Mark Dann, the Director of Government Affairs for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, for taking time to come out and talk to us. And I'm going to stop the recording now. And if you want to hang around and just chat, and people want to turn their cameras on, just have some social time, that is more than welcome.